The morning sun shimmered over downtown Los Angeles. Vendors were opening carts, joggers passed by, and the smell of brewed coffee drifted through the cool air. At one corner, a man in a plain gray hoodie waited patiently beside a food cart. No cameras, no entourage, just another face in the city crowd. That man was Manny Pacquiao, though no one around seemed to notice. After years of lights, belts, and roaring arenas, he enjoyed these rare, quiet moments, buying coffee, breathing fresh air, feeling normal. As he reached for his cup, a police cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb. Two uniformed officers stepped out, Officer Foster and Officer Blake. Their eyes swept the street until they landed on Manny. Something about him, his calm stance, the hoodie, the quiet confidence made Foster narrow his eyes. "Hey, you," he barked, pointing. "What are you doing here?" Manny turned, surprised but respectful. "Just getting coffee, sir." "ID," Foster ordered. Manny blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Show me some identification." People nearby glanced over. The tone was sharp, unnecessary. Manny could feel the weight of eyes turning toward him. He kept his voice steady. "I didn't know that was required to buy coffee." Blake stepped closer. "Don't get smart. You fit a description." Manny sighed quietly, pulling his wallet from his pocket. "Here," he said, handing over his ID with steady hands. Foster snatched it, barely looking at the name. "Pac, whatever. Where are you from?" "Right here," Manny replied evenly. The officer's tone hardened. "Don't lie to me." The street fell silent. A few bystanders lifted their phones, recording. The peaceful morning had shifted into something tense and uneasy. Manny looked at Foster directly, his calm unbroken. "Officer," he said softly, "you're making a mistake." Foster gave a mocking laugh. "Oh yeah, we'll see about that." He stepped closer, chest puffed, authority dripping from every word. The people watching could feel it, the tension, the arrogance, the quiet storm building behind Manny's composed eyes. And then, just before the next moment unfolded, but what Manny did next stunned everyone watching that street. A breeze swept through the street, rattling the food cart's metal frame as Officer Foster held Manny's ID between two fingers, staring at it like it was a fake. The crowd that had gathered kept a cautious distance, phones lifted, lenses aimed. Foster tilted his head, reading the name again. "Manny Pac. What is this? Some kind of joke?" Manny kept his composure. "That's my real name." Blake, the second officer, leaned over his partner's shoulder. "Yeah, right. You expect us to believe that? You think you can just make up a name like that to get out of trouble?" "I didn't make it up," Manny said calmly. "I haven't done anything wrong," Foster scoffed. "You people always say that." That phrase, "you people," hung in the air like a bad smell. Several bystanders frowned. A woman muttered under her breath, "That's not right." Foster didn't care. He stepped closer, his voice getting louder. "Why are you here? Where do you live? You working? You carrying anything illegal?" Manny's voice stayed low, steady, unthreatening. "I told you I'm just buying coffee," Blake sneered. "Answer the questions properly." When Manny didn't flinch, Blake gave him a light shove to the shoulder. The crowd gasped. One man started shouting, "Hey, that's not necessary!" But Foster raised his hand toward the crowd. "Mind your own business, folks. This doesn't concern you." That was the moment everything shifted. Manny straightened his posture. Not aggressive, just composed. The same quiet, coiled energy he carried in the ring surfaced in his eyes. "Officer," he said, his voice firm now, "I've complied with everything you asked. There's no reason to treat me this way." Foster smirked, pretending not to hear. "What, you think you're some kind of big shot?" Manny didn't answer. He didn't need to. The control in his tone, the discipline in his silence, it said everything. Foster took it as defiance. "You think you can talk back to me, huh?" Without warning, he jabbed a finger into Manny's chest. Blake moved around behind, his hand brushing his belt. The tension in the air thickened. Someone in the crowd yelled, "He's not resisting." Another voice followed, "You're on camera, officer." But Foster ignored them. He leaned in close, eyes hard. "You better watch that attitude before you end up in the back of my car." Manny met his stare evenly. "I'm not breaking any law, and I won't be intimidated." That simple line made Foster's jaw tighten. He hated when people didn't bow to him. "Hands behind your back," Foster snapped. Manny didn't move. "For what reason?" Suspicious behavior. The words were hollow, baseless. The crowd began to murmur louder. Phones zoomed in. Every second was being documented. Blake reached out to grab Manny's arm. Manny didn't resist, but he didn't submit either. "Sir," he said again, calm as stone, "you're making a serious mistake." Foster took a step closer, shouting now, trying to reassert control. "You think you can tell me what a mistake is? You think you're better than us?" The coffee vendor looked nervous, glancing between them. "Officer, he's just a customer," he tried to say, but Foster waved him off. Then, silence. A sharp smack echoed through the air. Foster had slapped Manny across the face. The sound stopped everything. The street went dead quiet. The only noise was the fluttering of a paper cup hitting the pavement. Manny didn't move. He didn't even raise a hand to his cheek. He just stood there, breathing slowly, his eyes locked on the man who just struck him. Foster realized too late what he'd done, but his pride forced him to double down. "Now maybe you'll learn who's in charge here," he spat. The people watching erupted in outrage. "You can't do that. That's assault." He didn't do anything, but Manny didn't yell back. He didn't lift a hand. His voice, when it came, was soft but powerful. "Are you done, officer?" The simplicity of the question sliced through the noise. Foster blinked, thrown off. "What did you just say?" Manny repeated. "Are you done?" Even Blake hesitated now, unsure what to do next. The man they thought was an ordinary civilian wasn't reacting the way they expected. There was no fear, only control, and that made everyone watching curious and uneasy. The woman who had been recording whispered, "He's someone important, isn't he?" Manny exhaled slowly, still calm. "I told you," he said. "You're making a mistake." The officers exchanged glances. Blake whispered something to Foster, but it was too late. The situation had already spiraled far beyond their control. The camera phones caught everything. The arrogance, the slap, the quiet strength. The world didn't know it yet, but this moment, right here, was about to explode across the internet. Have you ever seen someone abused by authority? Comment below. Also, tell us which country and city you're watching this story from. We'd love to know. The slap echoed long after it landed. For a few seconds, everything was still. No traffic noise, no chatter, not even a breath from the bystanders. It was as if the entire street had frozen, stunned by what they'd just witnessed. Manny Pacquiao stood motionless, his cheek reddening, his eyes locked on the officer who had just hit him. He didn't shout. He didn't retaliate. He simply stared. A silent, composed stare that carried more power than any punch he'd ever thrown. Foster, breathing heavily, looked unsettled for the first time. He hadn't expected that reaction. No rage, no argument, just calm. "What, you got nothing to say now?" Foster taunted, trying to fill the silence. "That's what I thought." Manny's voice was low, even, and precise. "You just crossed a line." The words were soft, but they hit like thunder. "Is that a threat?" Blake barked from behind. Manny turned his head slightly, eyes sharp. "No, it's a fact." The crowd had grown. Office workers, joggers, delivery drivers, all drawn by the commotion. Phones pointed from every direction. The camera lenses captured everything. The arrogance of the officers, the dignity of the man they were trying to humiliate. Foster waved his arms angrily. "Everyone back off. This is police business." But no one moved. A woman shouted, "You hit him for no reason." Someone else yelled, "You can't treat people like that." Foster's face reddened. "Quiet, or I'll start making arrests." Manny stayed still, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you angry, officer?" Foster glared at him. "Because people like you think you can talk back to us." "People like me?" Manny repeated quietly, the words deliberate, heavy. Foster didn't answer. He knew exactly what he'd said, and so did everyone listening. Manny took a slow breath. The air around him felt electric. "I've met people with power before," he said. "Real power doesn't need to shout." That line drew murmurs from the crowd. Some began to clap softly. Foster's jaw tightened. "You think you're clever, huh? Keep talking and I'll make sure you spend the night in a cell." Manny looked down briefly, then back up. "I've spent nights in worse places. A cell doesn't scare me." Blake stepped closer, trying to assert dominance. "You're lucky we don't cuff you right now." Manny didn't even flinch. "You're lucky I'm patient." That made Blake freeze. The tone wasn't threatening. It was controlled, precise, confident. It was the tone of a man who wasn't afraid. The tension was unbearable. Foster's hand twitched near his holster. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "Don't!" someone shouted. "He didn't do anything." Manny slowly raised both hands, palms open. "No need for weapons, officer. I'm unarmed. I've done nothing wrong." He took a step forward, not in aggression, but in courage. "You say you protect the public. Then protect your own dignity. Don't lose it over pride." Foster's face turned crimson. He'd never been spoken to like that, especially not by someone in plain clothes. "Enough," he shouted. "Turn around. Hands on your head." Manny didn't move. His expression remained unreadable, calm as a monk, firm as steel. "No," the single word stunned everyone. Foster blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no," Manny repeated. "I won't be humiliated for no reason." The crowd erupted in applause. People started chanting, "Leave him alone." "That's not justice." Blake hesitated. "Foster, maybe we should just shut up." Foster snapped, panic creeping into his voice. He was losing control, not just of the situation, but of his image. Manny spoke again, his voice carrying over the noise. "You don't know who I am, and that's fine. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for respect, the kind every human deserves." Those words hit harder than any punch. Foster's bravado cracked. His voice shook slightly. "Stop talking before you make this worse for yourself." Manny tilted his head. "Worse? You already hit a man for buying coffee. How much worse can it get for you?" That line broke the crowd's restraint. Cheers and shouts filled the air. People were now openly standing up for him. "Tell him, man! You're in the wrong, officer. We got it all on camera." Foster's hand twitched again. For a brief, dangerous moment, everyone feared he might draw his weapon, but he didn't. Deep down, even he realized he was cornered, not by Manny's strength, but by his own mistake. Manny took a slow step back, lowering his hands. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to remind you, you can't slap respect into people. You earn it." The sentence hung in the air, echoing louder than the slap had. Blake whispered almost nervously, "Foster, I think you should stop." But the senior officer was too blinded by pride to listen. "He's under arrest," he barked. Manny shook his head slowly. "No, officer. You're under judgment by every person standing here." Dozens of phones recorded the moment. The scene had transformed from a small argument into a public reckoning. And as the cameras rolled, Manny's quiet defiance became something larger, a symbol. He stood tall, unshaken, the red mark on his cheek glowing in the sunlight, a scar of dignity, not defeat. If you were standing there as a bystander, would you step in or stay quiet? Type your answer in the comments. The air was electric. The scene that had started as a random police check had now become something else, something bigger. Dozens of people lined the sidewalk, cameras raised high, catching every second. Foster and Blake, once confident, now looked uneasy as their authority began to crumble under the weight of public attention. Manny stood there, motionless but unyielding, his presence commanding without a single word. The redness on his cheek was still visible, yet his expression was unreadable, calm, patient, almost meditative. Then, somewhere in the back of the crowd, a teenager spoke up. "Wait a second," the boy said, squinting at his phone screen. "That guy, he looks like Manny Pacquiao." A few heads turned. "What?" someone asked. The boy zoomed in on his camera, comparing the live feed to a photo on his phone. "I'm serious. That's him! That's Manny Pacquiao." The words rippled through the crowd like wildfire. "Manny Pacquiao? No way!" "The boxer? Yeah. Look at his face." Within seconds, the whispers turned into a buzz. The name Pacquiao spread from person to person, from corner to corner, until the entire street was murmuring in disbelief. Officer Foster frowned, sensing the shift. "What are they talking about?" Blake, equally confused, glanced around. "I don't know, but they're saying something about boxing." A man from the crowd shouted, "Hey, officer! You just slapped a world champion." Foster froze. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." Another voice joined in. "That's Manny Pacquiao, the world boxing legend." The crowd began to surge closer, filming, shouting, defending the man who'd stood silently through it all. Manny didn't say a word. He didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. He simply looked down as if embarrassed by the attention. His humility only made the scene more powerful. Blake's voice shook slightly. "Sir, is that true? Are you?" Manny raised his hand gently. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said softly. "It matters how you treat people you don't recognize." That single line made the entire crowd erupt in applause. Foster's face drained of color. He looked at the ID again, reading the name more carefully this time. "Manny Pacquiao," he muttered under his breath. The reality hit him like a freight train. The man he'd just humiliated, the man he'd struck in front of 100 witnesses, was not only a global icon but someone with influence far beyond the boxing ring. Blake swallowed hard, whispering, "Oh no. Foster, we're screwed." But Foster, too proud to back down, tried to mask his panic with bluster. "I don't care who he is. Nobody's above the law." Manny looked at him steadily. "Neither are you, officer." The crowd cheered louder. Phones live-streamed the moment on multiple platforms. Comments flooded in instantly. "That's Manny. Can't believe this is real. How can anyone treat him like that? Look at the control he has. He's not even angry." A group of bystanders began chanting, "Respect! Respect!" Their voices grew louder, filling the street with rhythm and solidarity. Blake tugged on Foster's sleeve, whispering urgently, "We need to stop this." "Everyone's watching." Foster's hands trembled slightly, but he still barked, "Quiet! Everybody step back." Nobody moved. The authority he once commanded was gone, replaced by a sea of phones and eyes that no longer feared him. Manny, still calm, spoke again. "You wear that badge to serve, not to scare. Remember that." Foster's lips parted, but no words came out. Manny took a slow step forward, not threateningly, but with quiet strength. The officers instinctively stepped back. That simple movement said everything. It was power, earned not through fear but through integrity. The teenager who had recognized him raised his phone higher, shouting, "Manny, you're a hero, man." "You don't deserve this!" Manny turned to the boy and nodded gently. "Heroes aren't the ones who fight," he said. "They're the ones who stay calm when others lose control." The words struck deep. The crowd fell into respectful silence. Foster finally broke it with a shaky laugh, trying to save face. "All right, fine. Maybe you're some famous boxer, but you still can't talk to an officer that way." Manny's expression hardened slightly. "You hit a man for buying coffee and now you're trying to defend it. That's not law enforcement. That's ego." The crowd roared with approval. For the first time, Foster had no comeback. He looked around. Every camera, every witness, every recording trapped him. The authority he once had was gone. Manny didn't need to raise his voice. His silence spoke louder than any threat. Blake leaned closer to Foster and whispered, "He's not just a boxer, man. He's in government too. He's someone powerful." Foster's eyes widened slightly. "Government?" Blake nodded. "Yeah, I think he's like a senator or something." The realization drained the last bit of confidence from Foster's face. Manny noticed it, but said nothing. He simply stood tall, his dignity unbroken, his presence overwhelming. The crowd, sensing the tide had turned, began chanting his name. "Pacquiao, Pacquiao, Pacquiao." And through it all, Manny remained humble, calm and composed. The eye of the storm he never started. But the real twist came moments later, when a police vehicle arrived and the officer who stepped out recognized Manny instantly. The chanting grew louder, echoing through the busy street. "Pacquiao! Pacquiao!" Cars slowed down. People leaned out of windows, and by now almost everyone knew what was happening. The officers who had started this mess stood surrounded by a crowd that was no longer silent. Officer Foster's hands trembled. His eyes darted from the chanting crowd to Manny's face, as if trying to figure out how everything had flipped so fast. Manny stood tall, calm as ever. But now there was something different in his expression. Not anger, not pride, but disappointment. The kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than rage. He took one quiet step forward. "Officer Foster," he began evenly. "You asked for my ID, you got it. You demanded answers, I gave them. You even raised your hand against me, and still I didn't fight back." Foster opened his mouth to speak, but Manny raised a hand, silencing him instantly. The crowd hushed too, every phone pointed at the scene. "I kept my calm," Manny continued. "Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted you to see what power without discipline looks like." The line hit hard. Foster's jaw clenched. You think you're better than me? Manny's gaze was steady. No, I think you've forgotten what your badge stands for. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some clapped quietly. Others whispered, "He's teaching them right now." Foster's voice rose again, shaky but defiant. You think you can embarrass me in front of these people? Manny's tone sharpened just a little. No, officer. You embarrassed yourself the moment you raised your hand to someone you're supposed to protect. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, "Exactly," and applause followed. Blake, who had been silent for most of the confrontation, finally spoke. Sir, maybe we should just... De-escalate. Let's just walk away. But Foster's pride wouldn't allow it. He turned on Blake. No! He's mocking us! Manny took another step forward, his voice calm but commanding. You don't understand, officer. I didn't want this scene. I came here for a cup of coffee and not confrontation. But now here we are. You've turned a simple moment into a lesson the whole world is about to watch. Foster's breath quickened. Lesson? What lesson? Manny's eyes didn't waver. That respect isn't given by fear, it's earned by action. The crowd roared again. Foster's face was red with frustration. Enough, he shouted. You think I care who you are? You think you can talk to me like this? Manny exhaled slowly. The patience of a man who had been in thousands of fights but never wanted this one. I've fought champions in every corner of the world, he said. Men stronger, faster, tougher than me. But you... He paused, letting the silence draw out. You fight the weak. That's not strength, officer. That's cowardice. The words landed like punches. The crowd was now chanting louder than ever. Respect, respect, respect. Foster's confidence shattered. His eyes darted toward his partner for support, but Blake was staring at the ground. He knew it was over. Manny took a breath and lowered his tone again, speaking not with anger but with calm authority. You see, power isn't just about force. It's about responsibility. The badge on your chest is supposed to represent justice, not intimidation. Then, almost as an afterthought, Manny said the line that would make headlines around the world. I tried to stay quiet, he said, voice steady. But maybe it's time you knew who I am. The crowd leaned in. Cameras zoomed closer. My name, Manny said, pausing between words, is Manny Pacquiao. And as of this week, I've been appointed the new police chief liaison for international relations. The words dropped like a thunderclap. The crowd exploded in cheers, disbelief, and shock. People screamed, What? He's the new chief? Oh my God. Foster's mouth fell open. His hand dropped from his holster. Blake looked like he'd seen a ghost. Manny continued, his tone steady and gracious. I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't need to. Rank shouldn't decide how you treat someone. Humanity should. The street was silent again, but this time it was out of respect. Manny looked directly into Foster's eyes. You used your authority to humiliate a stranger. I used my patience to show you what real discipline looks like. Foster stuttered. Sir. I didn't know, Manny interrupted gently. That's the problem, officer. You didn't care to know. You saw a man in plain clothes and made a judgment. He took one step closer, lowering his voice so only Foster could hear. Though the crowd stayed silent. I don't want your apology. I want you to learn. Foster blinked rapidly, words failing him. The weight of what he'd done finally hit him. Not just the physical act of disrespect, but the moral one. Manny stepped back, turned slightly toward the crowd and said clearly, This isn't about me. It's about every person who's been disrespected by those meant to protect them. Authority without empathy is dangerous. Power without humility is useless. Cheers erupted again, applause, shouts, even tears from a few onlookers. The chant returned, but this time it wasn't just his name. It was his message. Respect. 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 Foster stood there, red-faced, humiliated, shaking his head. Blake said quietly, Sir, we need to call this in. Manny nodded once. Do that, because the next conversation you'll be having is with your superiors. He turned to walk away. The crowd parted like water around him, phones raised, eyes wide with admiration. Manny didn't look angry. He didn't even look victorious. He looked peaceful, and that calm, that composure made the entire city stop and think. Moments later, a second police car pulled up. The officer who stepped out recognized Manny instantly, and that's when everything truly changed. The roar of the crowd hadn't even settled when the sound of sirens cut through the air. A second police cruiser pulled up to the curb, tires screeching to a stop. Heads turned, phones raised higher. Everyone knew this was about to get even more interesting. From the car stepped Captain Reynolds, a senior officer with years of experience and the kind of composure that only comes from hard lessons learned on the job. He scanned the scene quickly. Crowd everywhere, 2 officers looking shaken, and at the center of it all stood Manny Pacquiao. Reynolds froze for half a second, disbelief flashing across his face. Then his expression shifted completely. Recognition, respect, panic. He hurried forward, motioning to the other officers. What on earth is going on here? Foster opened his mouth, trying to regain control. Sir, this man was being uncooperative. Reynolds snapped his head toward him. Uncooperative? With him? Foster frowned, confused. Sir, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, Reynolds cut in sharply. You just assaulted one of the most respected men on the planet, Senator Manny Pacquiao, international liaison to the police department. The words hit harder than any punch Manny had ever thrown. The crowd erupted in cheers. Phones shook with excitement as people realized they were witnessing the fallout in real time. Foster turned pale. Sir, I didn't know. Reynolds' tone was cold. That's exactly the problem, Foster. You didn't care to know. Manny, still calm, spoke softly. Captain, it's all right. I didn't come here to cause trouble. Reynolds turned to him instantly, posture straightening in respect. Chief Pacquiao, with all due respect, what they did is unacceptable. On behalf of this department, Manny raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Don't apologize for them. Let their actions speak for themselves. The crowd quieted again, hanging on every word. Reynolds nodded solemnly, then turned to his men. Officers Foster and Blake, you're relieved of duty effective immediately pending investigation. Hand over your badges, the crowd gasped, some even cheering. Foster's hand shook as he unpinned his badge. Sir, please. Reynolds' voice was like stone. You disrespected a citizen, used unnecessary force, and brought shame on the badge. This department doesn't tolerate that, no matter who it's done to. Blake silently followed, removing his badge, eyes down. Foster, however, couldn't let go of his pride. Sir, I swear I didn't know. If I'd known who he was, Manny stepped forward quietly. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. That one sentence silenced the street again. Even Reynolds looked humbled by the truth in it. Foster's mouth opened, then closed. He had no defense left. Reynolds sighed deeply, turning to the crowd. Everyone here, thank you for recording. Send your footage directly to the Internal Affairs email. We'll review every second of this. The crowd cheered again, some shouting, Justice! Others chanting, Respect! Through it all, Manny stood quietly, not basking in the moment, but reflecting. His eyes were steady, his voice calm when he finally spoke. Captain, he said, I don't want to ruin these men's lives, but I want them to understand that their actions affect how the world sees all officers. Every act of arrogance destroys the public's trust. Reynolds nodded. Understood, sir. You have my word, this won't be swept under the rug. Manny turned back to Foster. The officer's eyes were filled with regret, shame replacing anger. You see this crowd? Manny said, gesturing around them. They didn't come here to see me. They came here to see how justice works. You can still be part of that if you learn humility. Foster swallowed hard, whispering, Yes, sir. Manny gave a slight nod. Then start today. For the first time, Foster looked like a man realizing the weight of his uniform. The crowd began to applaud again, not because of punishment, but because of Manny's restraint. There was something almost poetic about how he handled it. No shouting, no revenge, just truth and dignity. Reynolds motioned to a few other officers to clear the scene. Let's get the area secured. Before stepping back, he looked at Manny. Sir, you could have handled that very differently. Thank you for showing what real leadership looks like. Manny offered a polite nod. We all serve the same people, Captain. The only difference is how we choose to do it. Reynolds smiled faintly. I'll be reporting this to the commissioner myself. Manny turned toward the crowd one last time. This isn't about me, he said, his voice carrying through the street. It's about everyone who's ever been judged before being understood. Let's start seeing each other for who we are, not what we wear. Phones caught every syllable. That one statement would become the headline of the next day's news. As the crowd erupted once more, Manny nodded respectfully to the captain and began to walk away. Every step he took was followed by applause. Not for his fame, not for his title, but for his humanity. The officer who had once raised his hand against him now stood frozen, the reality of his actions etched deeply into his face. By nightfall, the footage would explode across the internet. The world would watch the slap that turned into a lesson in respect, and how Manny Pacquiao responded would inspire millions. By sunset, the world had already seen it. The clip, a shaky, raw, and powerful, began circulating across social media. At first, just a few locals posted it with captions like, "Unbelievable, this just happened downtown." But within hours, it had spread like wildfire. Millions of people clicked, shared, and commented. The title alone was enough to grab attention. "Cops slap Manny Pacquiao, and he says I'm the new chief." The thumbnail showed Manny standing calmly in his hoodie, surrounded by officers and bystanders, eyes steady, posture unshaken. And the moment he revealed his identity, "My name is Manny Pacquiao, and I'm the new chief liaison," became the defining quote of the week. Hashtags flooded every platform. Respect not rank. Manny Pacquiao, or power with humility. Major news outlets picked up the story within hours. CNN, Manny Pacquiao shows what real leadership looks like. BBC, from world champion to symbol of justice. ABS-CBN, Pacquiao's calm response to police harassment wins the internet. The footage was everywhere: television, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. Some slowed it down to analyze the officer's expression the moment realization hit. Others used Manny's quote as motivational edits with dramatic music. Memes, reaction videos, even talk shows. Everyone had an opinion. But beyond the entertainment, something deeper was happening. People started sharing their own stories of being profiled, disrespected, or humiliated for how they looked. The comment sections overflowed with emotion. "This made me cry. I've been through this before." Manny handled that with so much class. True leadership. We need more people like him in positions of power. Even police departments from other countries began discussing the incident during internal meetings, using it as an example of de-escalation, composure, and moral strength. Meanwhile, Manny stayed silent for almost 24 hours. No interviews, no posts, just silence. Then at exactly 9 p.m. the next evening, a simple message appeared on his official account. It read, "No one should be judged by appearance. Respect must be our first language." Manny Pacquiao, that single sentence was shared more than 10 million times in the next 12 hours. World leaders, celebrities, and influencers began quoting him. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson tweeted, "Powerful reminder. Respect over ego. Salute, champ." LeBron James reposted the clip with the caption, "Handled it like a true king." Even members of the Filipino police force released statements thanking Manny for setting an example. The police commissioner officially launched an investigation into the incident, promising reforms in officer conduct and accountability. As for Officer Foster, his face had become instantly recognizable, and not in a good way. News crews camped outside his precinct, and his suspension became public knowledge. Some demanded he be fired. Others wanted him to undergo mandatory sensitivity and ethics training. Manny, however, chose a different approach. During a small press conference later that week, he addressed the issue with humility. Standing behind a podium dressed in a simple navy suit, he said softly, "I don't hate those officers. I forgive them. What I hope for is that they learn, not just for me, but for the next person they meet on the street. Everyone deserves dignity." The reporters were silent. His words didn't sound like revenge, they sounded like wisdom. He continued, "If I had reacted with anger, I would have proved them right. But by staying calm, I showed what respect truly means. This isn't just about authority. It's about humanity." That line was replayed everywhere. It became the moral center of the story. Over the next few days, universities invited Manny to speak about leadership and discipline. Police training academies began referencing the video during ethics sessions. The event, which began as an ugly misunderstanding, had turned into a global conversation about respect, restraint, and responsibility. One evening, as Manny walked quietly through another crowded street, this time without cameras or chaos, he noticed something different. A police officer standing on the corner saw him, straightened up, and gave a respectful nod. Manny smiled and nodded back. No words, just mutual understanding. Somewhere nearby, a teenager whispered to his friend, That's the guy who didn't fight back. And that, more than any title or trophy, became his legacy. The man who stood tall without raising his fists. Back online, the clip continued to grow. By the end of the week, it had passed 300 million views, translated into multiple languages, and inspired countless comments of unity and hope. People weren't just typing his name anymore. They were typing his message. If you believe in respect and equality, type respect in the comments, and millions did. The internet, often a place of anger and division, suddenly found itself united around a moment of grace. Manny's final post that week summed it up perfectly. Respect is not a reaction. It's a choice. Choose it even when others don't. That quote went viral again. News anchors closed their shows with it. Schools printed it on banners. And somewhere, far from the noise, Manny sat quietly sipping coffee at another corner shop. The same calm smile on his face, because in the end, he didn't need to throw a punch to win this fight. He had already won, in the hearts of millions. If you believe in respect and equality, type respect in the comments below.